Okay, Moshe, you're on.
Okay. Well, hi, everybody. I'm Moshe Margolin, one of the co-chairs, along with Freddie Perlmutter of the Adult Education Committee of the Jewish Center in wonderful Princeton, New Jersey. On behalf of the committee, I want to welcome you to another Goes Global series. The series was created to give our adult learning community an even wider variety of speakers and topics. We hope our focus on Jewish communities around the world helps all of us to better understand these communities beyond the borders of our country. Today's program is on Jewish life in Germany, past and present. Before I turn the program over to Rabbi Miro to introduce her colleague and friend, I would like to go over some of the ground rules for today's program. The audience will be muted throughout the program to avoid inadvertent distractions. We want to ensure that we get as many questions as we can in the time allotted. If you have a question, in the chat box and a host will review it. Questions will be curated to avoid duplications. We will have a question and answer session at the conclusion of Rabbi Ederberg's remarks. If you have a clarification question that is a burning one and can't wait until the end of the talk, please submit that question to the chat box, starting with the word immediate. Please keep your questions as concise as possible. Thank you for your understanding and cooperation. Rabbi Earl.
Hello, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Can
yeah,
you hear me?
Hear you. I can hear
Wonderful.
you.
It's a joy and honor to be able to bring friends of mine to Princeton, virtually and maybe even in person one day. So today we get to learn from our distinguished colleague, Rabbi Gesa Erdeberg. I met her when we were roommates at a rabbinical assembly convention many, many years ago, and she is what I would call a rabbinic superhero. The first rabbi who's female to be ordained in Germany was Rabbi Regina Jonas, who died during the Shoah. Rabbi Erdeberg is the second female rabbi in Berlin after Rabbi Regina Jonas. She is the rabbi of the, and I'm going to butcher this, I think, a little bit, Renovated Synagogue in Berlin. She was ordained in Jerusalem at our conservative movement Masorti Seminary, the Schechter Institute, in 2002. She is the founder of Masorti Germany, which connects all of our synagogues, conservative Masorti synagogues worldwide. She also helped to found a Masorti kindergarten that serves 80 children, and the Jewish International School, a bilingual day school, a Hebrew-German school for 1 to 6 that opened in 2018. She's a founding member of Israel, and from how I know the rabbi is that she is an active board member and the financial secretary of the International Rabbinical Assembly, the Association of Masorti Conservative Rabbis. She was also very instrumental in opening the Zacharias Frankel College in Berlin, Potsdam, and serves as their spiritual advisor. Rabbi Erdeberg has much to teach us about what it means to be a leader and to be a rabbi in Germany today. Thank you so much, dear friend, for coming to speak to our community.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Miro, for this lovely and sweet introduction. It's just wonderful to have friends all over the world, and you are one of the dearest, so to speak. Working together with you in the Rabbinical Assembly has been always a great pleasure, and seeing you, and it's for me, it's one of the big losses of the pandemic that we have not met in person in the last 2 years, and really very much looking forward to doing that soon again. So my apologies for not having on my mind that the clocks were changed just recently, I think tonight probably, right? In the US, last night. But here I am. I actually want to, when we were talking about this this talk and this evening, we talked about topics and what would be important to cover and lovely preparation, etc. Actually, since then, the world has been turned, at least in the European perspective, very much upside down. And I would like to start with what we are doing right now and where we stand with the Ukrainian guests coming to Berlin. And then we'll go. I think we didn't talk, Moshe and Rabbi Mary. Is that fine with you that we turn this around and start with that? Because I think it will also give you a picture of who we are and how we work in a nutshell. And then we can go, and then let's maybe have a round of, if there are questions, and then go back into how we started as Masorti Germany. Just as a little bit of a structural background, as Rabbi Mero already said, we have a nursery school here in Berlin. We, meaning is Masorti Germany, serving 80 kids, and the school grades 1 through 6, serving 50 kids at the moment. I'm also the rabbi at the end. Rabbi Mero did a very good job, I think, in saying that in German. It's always my test, of the Oranienburger Straße Synagogue. That's the one you see in my background. There is, and that will be important also when we go a little bit back into the history and the development of the movement here. There is one so-called unified Jewish community in Berlin, which has 10,000 members. This community has 10 synagogues, from Orthodox to Reform, and we are in the middle. There's a little bit of a coincidence why we got this beautiful building with the Golden Dome. I'll get back to that. So we have this community structure, which is supposedly to be pluralistic and everybody is under one roof. But we decided in 2002, when I came back from rabbinical school, which I did in Israel, that we would start Masorti Germany as an independent organization, because it would enable us to move more quickly and do things in a more flexible way, and also connect much easier to the international movement. Let me say that again, as Rabbi Mero already said it. Masorti really is the same thing as the conservative movement in the United States. We are one global movement, and we, for several reasons, and I'm not going there in terms of the word conservative, outside of the United States, I think more or less everybody calls themselves Masorti, which means traditional, and is, I think, a good description. I also like that by saying Masorti, people have to ask, what do you mean? What does this mean? What's that? And can't put you easily into a drawer and say, yeah, I know what conservative is, so I also know what the conservative movement is supposed to be. And this is obviously especially true for Germany and Europe, where the developments are a little bit more slowly. So let me walk backwards from today. This morning, I spent 3 hours already with the CEO of Masorti Germany, strategizing what do we do with our Ukrainian guests, because we feel we do not want the people we are serving at the moment. We don't call them refugees, we call them guests, and I'll get more to that. We had a lovely Kabbalat Shabbat at the Masorti school with a full service, full tefillah, and dinner afterwards, cooked and prepared by volunteers, with 40 people who fled from the Ukraine and have come to Berlin, and are right now, all but one family have found host families. So they could move out of the hotel, which was the first stop, and are at host families. We started we have already Ukrainian kids attending our nursery school, kindergarten, and on Tuesday we will start a special class for the Ukrainian school children. And on Thursday, next Thursday, we'll start a German language class for the adults. So this is where we stand, and it already shows you also how closely connected we are. So this, I think I got the first call about this, or like probably Friday or a couple of days before last week, from our Jerusalem office, Rabbi Ederberg. We have people stuck in Chernovitz, which is a city which, you know, to some of you might have a historic sound because it was a very, very important Jewish city. Chernovitz is on the western border of the Ukraine. We have people, about 50 to 60 people from our Masorti congregations who are in Chernovitz, and we're trying to get them out via bus. Can you welcome them in Berlin? And since then, we started crazily preparing. And in the meantime, on Monday, this last Monday, like 6 days ago, and I'm really losing track of time, we had the first group arriving by plane from the congregation in Odessa. And then on Wednesday morning at 4:30 o'clock in the morning, a bus with 30 people from arrived by bus. It took them 4 days actually of traveling, getting out of the Ukraine to Romania, driving through Romania, and then staying at the border Romania-Hungary, which was already not so easy to get through, and then driving by bus to Budapest. In Budapest, a group of people left the bus and they went on planes to Israel, where they are welcomed by our congregations and the movement there. And the others arrived, as I said, Wednesday morning. So we set up a welcome center in the nursery school, in the kindergarten, in the basement, and, you know, took the families in, served food, and started putting them into different, being hosted by families of our synagogue. We have been talking a lot while doing this about why don't we just say, you know, let's help any refugee that comes in, or at least let's help everybody who is Jewish who comes in. But we realized, and I think it was, for me, it was confirmed this Friday evening when we sat together and did this beautiful Kabbalat Shabbat service, that as Masorti conservative Jews, we have this special connection worldwide. So by welcoming this group into our midst, we can give them some absolutely unique feeling at home and feeling that they really are our guests and not our welfare project, so to speak. I even said jokingly, I was dreaming that before the pandemic, I started dreaming about doing congregational trips all over Europe, you know, like Paris and London, etc. It's all just 1 hour flight from Berlin. We've been welcoming like a bar mitzvah class from Paris once. We had young teenagers from London with us. We had young adults from Budapest once for Shabbat with us. And Kiev was always one of the possible goals where I wanted also to go personally. So I said, on a certain level, I want you to consider this just your congregation visiting our congregation, which obviously is, how can I say that? It's not the reality, and we are very conscious of the reality we are dealing with, but we felt it's really, really important that we give these people the feeling of being at home. And now we're working with them and, you know, looking into the Jewish status, etc., because Germany, the German government has already announced, and the Jewish organizations are working closely with the German government, that Jewish refugees from the Ukraine will receive somewhat privileges in different ways. So anybody who comes as a war refugee gets and is recognized as a war refugee gets 3 years of stay. People from the Ukraine, by the way, can come just by there with their regular passport and can stay here for 90 days. So getting into the country is not a problem. You don't need a visa, etc. So war refugees, generally speaking, get this permit for 3 years, but they might not be free in selecting where they want to live, because people obviously come into Berlin and then they are distributed all over the country so that the social services, etc., can take better care. For the Jewish refugees, the system will be, and it's not yet in place, so we are in a limbo at the moment, will be that it's going to be the congregations, the Jewish congregations, who will be their first point of contact, and they will check the documents and then arrange for residence permit, including work permit, with no time limitations. So if anybody else gets kind of 3 years and then let's see what's happening afterwards, Jewish refugees can come in and stay as long as they want, which already gives you a glimpse about how, about modern Germany. I think this is, I don't want to, I'm not a sentimental enough person to go into telling these horrible stories of how people feel and how they left, whom they left behind, and etc. I'm thinking I'm just much more down to earth and tachlis, but let me just say that we have been very careful keeping social distancing, mask wearing, etc. during COVID now. I have, since the refugees came, I have more or less given up on it. I'm still working, wearing a mask, etc. But I have been hugging so many people, and so many, especially of the women, then they feel, they get this hug and then they start crying because their husbands have to be left behind. I don't know if you're aware of that. The Ukraine currently forbids exit to males between the age of 18 and 60. So the men have to stay in the country. Luckily, some of our people, they have also an Israeli passport, so they can get out on the Israeli passport. But it's really heartbreaking. And obviously, sisters, uncles, parents are still somewhere there, and people just also might not know what's happening. And now they're here and do not know what's going on, what's going to be with their lives. And they have lives which they have left back there, right? One told me, it's totally ridiculous now to think about that, but I have these beautiful, she's, do you say that in English? Orchids, like this very, very fancy flowers. Yeah. So she has an amazing, that's one of her hobbies, and she has an amazing collection. And she knows, even if she gets back in 2 weeks, the flowers will be dead because nobody can take care of that. So I think breaking down this big war and catastrophe into something like that, you're losing your precious collection of orchids. I think that makes it so much more real and so much more touchable, so to speak. Okay, I think that's as far as I wanted to tell you and update you on the Ukraine situation. If there are any questions, happy to stop at the moment and answer them.
Yes, I have a couple of questions, specifically on the Ukraine, and one that is not. On the Ukraine question, one participant asked, how many Ukrainian refugees, Jewish and otherwise, have come to Germany, and what is the capacity for you to take in guests like these?
Mm-hmm. So I really can't say what the overall numbers are. We are talking about tens of thousands who have come into Berlin. And just to give you a feeling, the central train station, most of them come by train, some come by cars, some come by buses who are organized as we did through the Jewish communities, for example, or other organizations. The central train station in Berlin has been transformed into a welcome center, so to speak. They have set up a big tent just outside the train station, and volunteers are coming in there bringing sandwiches, bringing cupcakes, bringing food for animals, etc. Coming with signs where it says, I can host 2 adults and 2 children, and then they just kind of meet the people right here. It's amazing, like the feeling of welcoming is just amazing. We as Masorti, we started very quickly on ourselves. The Berlin Jewish community, with its 10,000 members, has by now also set up a welcoming center at the JCC. You need to know for that, and we'll go back into the German Jewish history in a little later. Somewhere between 40 and 60% of today's German Jewish community has Ukrainian relatives, 40 to 60%. And then add in all the others who speak Russian. So we are especially prepared to welcome. Everybody's bringing over their relatives. That's those who have still stayed behind, but also for the others. So I just talked to the mathematics teacher of my kids. They finished high school 3 years ago, and she retired right at the time. I knew she was Russian speaking. Now talking to her and trying to recruit her as a volunteer for our kids now, she tells me, yeah, well, I've been working in Odessa at the Jewish high school for 10 years before coming to Berlin. So the connections are very, very close. We as Masorti, we will be able in our kindergarten nursery school to have, like, currently we're thinking 15 kids, maybe we can add another 15 kids, so 2 more groups. The school is talking about 1 class or 2, so also there we're talking about somewhere between 20 and 30 kids, I would say. We will then, when our capacities are full, we might just channel them into the general Jewish community and just say, come to Masorti for Shabbat services. And now we're preparing for Purim, actually, right? So right after we finish, I have to talk to my volunteers who are right now setting up the Purim party place for Wednesday. And then we will continue. The next step will probably be to offer people to go on to the other Masorti congregations all over Europe. So, be it Sweden, the Brits are still figuring out what to do because the visa situation is different. Paris has already offered, Budapest has offered, so we'll see.
Thank you, Rabbi. I have another question we might take at the end. Don't want to interrupt you though, so you could proceed.
Okay, fine.
I'll hold it.
Very good. So then let's get back. I think I'll start with, because it's also so present at the moment, right? What we're seeing now, and all the Jewish institutions getting ready for that, reminds many of us of what happened approximately 30 years ago, when after the wall came down, a huge immigration from the former Soviet Union happened to Germany. These are the people now who are now standing there and serving soup and, sorting through the donated clothing and helping with translation, etc., for the refugees right now. And they say, obviously, they have these flashbacks and everything is coming back, but they were not refugees, right? They came, they chose to leave the former Soviet Union. They had time to prepare. They made conscious decisions about either going to Israel or staying somewhere in Europe, staying in Germany. The situation was very different though, because now I'm getting even further back in the history, so to speak. After the war in 1945, the general feeling was there won't be any more Jewish life in Germany. People, those who had survived, were many of them in so-called displaced person camps, like places where people connected, and the general feeling was we are going to emigrate to Israel as quickly as possible. What then happened was that people for all kinds of personal reasons, health reasons, decided to stay on, or put it the other way around, did not leave, never making the decision of not leaving, but postponing another 5 years and another 5 years, starting to having kids, etc. And the feeling was still, we, the German Jewish community, is sitting on packed suitcases. We are not really at home here, and anytime we might just pack up and leave. And then in the early 90s, two things happened like really parallel. One was that the generation who was born after the war realized, well, actually, we are not leaving. We are now raising our own kids in Germany. We might have gone to Israel or the United States and lived there for a couple of years and then decided, actually, we really feel at home in Germany and are going back. So there was a feeling of unpacking the suitcases exactly when this huge immigration from the former Soviet Union started. In 1989, there were about 30,000 members of Jewish communities in all of Germany. During the next 10 years, 200,000 people came from the former Soviet Union. Probably 100,000 of them Jewish themselves, plus their non-Jewish family members, which obviously also the congregations took in and helped with getting acclimated and getting settled into Germany. So this was a huge transformation. And those who were here and were welcoming those who coming in, obviously then also realized how German they already are and that this is where they are. This was also an interesting change in the religious life of German Jewry, because before that, most of the synagogues, by far most of the synagogues, were Orthodox by name and by liturgy, but very few people were Orthodox in terms of their own personal lifestyle. But there was this feeling we have to, like the synagogue is a space where you preserve some continuity from before the war, and therefore change and thinking about liturgy and bringing in new melodies, etc., was something unheard of. In the early 90s, the younger generation got together. And this happened all over Germany, and we also coordinated amongst each other. I remember, say, what's today the Oranienburger Straße Synagogue started one Sunday afternoon when I, myself, and two other friends were sitting, over a cup of coffee. And as usual, you start to talk and then you start complaining. And what do? You complain about the rabbi and the services and how boring it is and it's not participatory and etc. And then we somehow came up with, okay, why don't we try something different? And then we actually spoke to a couple of other friends, came up with a list of 60 people who might be interested in doing something different, met at the JCC one afternoon, I still remember this crowded room, and decided to start, well, let's do our own services. And we started doing Friday evening services with a potluck dinner afterwards once a month. Now, for American ears, this sounds like, yeah, that's what you do, right? You don't like the rabbi, you grab a couple of people, move out, start the new synagogue in your living room, and that's how synagogues get started. This is so not German, because here you have to have a well-established institution, you need to have an organization, you need to kind of get permission. And after the first service we did, several people said something like, this was lovely, the melodies were nice, it was amazing to see that women could participate equally, etc. But sitting in a half circle in a classroom and just a table in the front with candles on it, etc., it just does not feel right. You need a synagogue building in order to have services. So we kept doing this for like 3 years, meeting once a month at the JCC in one of the classrooms, while some people were preparing the potluck dinner in the in the neighboring room. And then we asked the Berlin Jewish community for a more permanent space. And then they said, well, actually, there is this building in Eastern Berlin, which was renovated, and there is a synagogue built into that building, and the synagogue is standing empty. Why don't you go there and have services there? And it was so not attractive to many people because the Jewish community was living in the west of the city, and this was like really in the east. But that's how we moved into the beautiful building you see in the back of my picture. And indeed, there was a newly renovated synagogue, as it should be, dark benches, not very comfortable to sit on. You could also, I'm not going into the details, but you could really see that the people who put the furniture in there did not really think about the functionality. Like you couldn't do a real hack, you couldn't walk around with the Torah because the benches were too, and some other issues. It even had mechitza in there because, now you'll love that, because they thought we are doing the synagogue mostly probably for all the American tourists who will now start coming after the wall came down. And since all of the Americans are Orthodox, we need a synagogue with a mechitza, which shows you how totally disconnected German Jewry was from what was going on in the rest of the world, right? So we moved in there. At the beginning, our group was small enough to just be in the, in the space before the mechitza. And when the group did grow and we needed more space, several of the members, we just came in with saws and took down the mechitza physically, which I think was a really beautiful, beautiful step. I was at that time, I was supposedly working on a PhD. And then I found myself organizing the synagogue, starting to teach bar and bat mitzvah kids. And I realized I have to make a decision, which then prompted me to go to rabbinical school. I would have, my first option was JTS in New York because but Ismar Schorsch, the then chancellor, who, as you might know, was born in Germany, so we had this very immediate and personal connection, said that he recommends very much that I should do rabbinical school in Israel. His point was that studying the sources in Hebrew would be very important and really having good Hebrew language skills, etc. What neither he nor me realized at that time, and I only realized it later, that since you have so many Israelis living in Germany, and very often the Israelis, and I know that that's also true sometimes in the US, the main qualification is their knowledge of Hebrew. And then they feel like entitled to say, but this is authentic and this is not. So being able to go back to Berlin and speaking Hebrew and having lived through, which was then the second Intifada while we had our oldest kids were born, twins, was even more important than having studied the texts and discussed the rabbinic texts and the biblical texts in Hebrew. So we came back to Germany in 2002, living in Berlin, but I started serving a small congregation in southern Germany, which was very typical. It had 300 members. We are counting in Germany individual members, not households. So you make your calculation how many households this would be. All but 3 families were immigrants from the former Soviet Union. This congregation in Weiden, they were actually in '89, they were about to close down because the older generation had died, the younger might have moved away. And then the president at that time, she said, no, that's not going to happen. And she went herself to one of the absorption centers and recruited people and said, we want to build this congregation. And then it grew quickly to 300 members and even more, because there was in that town a centralized absorption center. So many people would get there first, stay there for a year, half a year or a year till they knew enough German, etc. And then they moved on, which means that this small congregation of 25 members originally served about 1,500 people who moved through that congregation during the 10 to 15 years after the wall came down. I was absolutely happy there. And also it did help a lot being able to make all the mistakes you make as a young rabbi, to make them somewhere in a small and loving congregation who were just happy to have a rabbi at all, while at the same time running the Masoti Germany in Berlin as a CEO. So while I was serving this congregation with Shabbat services and Sunday school and going to see people in their homes, etc., we started building Masoti Germany in Berlin. And I thought, let's work with adult education, because I felt, you can get people together. It's a great way of starting community building. And then I realized that this is not going to work. People are so traumatized and so far away from from understanding that Judaism can be something living, supportive, warm, and Hamish, because it's for so many of them. We're talking the early 90s, right? So this is no, actually no. When I came back from a real, it was 2002. So this is, say, 20 years ago. Let me share with you one example. We were running this Lehrhaus, and I had prepared this shiur with Talmudic texts and biblical texts and halachic texts, etc., talking about weddings. What is the meaning of the chuppah in Judaism? And suddenly, one of the participants gets into an argument with another one, and then he says, "How dare you explain to me how I should understand this text? Your family emigrated in time and you just were in Argentina during the war. I survived with Polish partisans in the woods. How dare you tell me how to understand this text?" I was sitting there and I was like, okay, what am I going to do now? How can you pull this back and bring this back into a conversation? And I realized that this is the trauma of the survivor generation will always dominate if you work with the adults. So having young kids myself and having friends with young kids, we decided we'll do this differently, because no matter how traumatized parents are, Jewish parents are, what's sure is they want a warm and lovely and welcoming and safe space for their kids. So in 2004, we opened a nursery school with 7 kids. And again, I had thought we'll do a bilingual Hebrew-German nursery school, because then we'll get those families who are really, really interested in deep Jewish education for their kids. Actually, instead, I got the secular Israelis, because they were interested in Hebrew-German bilingual education for their kids, right? And I still remember we went to the Israeli embassy here in Berlin, because they also had some young families who were interested, and I presented the concept of the nursery school, etc. So one of the parents, and I brought this beautiful flyer with the pictures, etc. So one of the parents goes like, in Hebrew, "Katuv po tfilah." It says prayer on your flyer. Are you going to pray with the kids? Like, totally in shock, because secular Israelis. And I said, you know what? The worst thing will be your kid will like the tefillah we are doing, the prayer we are doing. And even worse than that, you might start enjoying it. Okay, so we started with 7 Israeli kids. Today we have 80 kids in 5 groups. 2 of them are bilingual English-German, 3 are bilingual Hebrew-German. And as of this week, as we just said, we have another one who is going to be Russian-German, which is easy, because anyways, we have about, depending on the year, between 12 and 15 different mother tongues in the kindergarten, because Berlin is such an international city, such a cosmopolitan city. So people just come in and we have to convince parents, say, English-speaking parents who speak only English at home want to send their kid into the Hebrew-German class so that the kid can get more languages. And we try to convince them, let them at least be in the English-German class first, so that they can first learn English and German, and then add it into it. In 2017, a group of parents from the kindergarten came to me and said, Rabbi Gisa, you owe us something. And I was like, oh, okay, what did I do wrong? What's going on here? And then they continued and said, you owe us something. We have experienced in this nursery school Jewish life in such a way which we never ever would have thought possible. Warm, welcoming, diverse, equality between men and women, LGBTIQ, inclusive, etc. This needs to continue. We need a school. So together with this group of parents, we managed, that was a meeting in May, I think, 2017. And in August 2018, we did open the school. So you can imagine how crazy that year was. The school started with 2 classes because the parents said, if you want our first graders, you also need to provide an option for our 3rd or 4th grader, because we cannot, sending the 2 kids to 2 different schools will not work in terms of family logistics. The school was hit by COVID in its 2nd year. Now imagine this, right? You have a team of teachers, you have a group of parents who do not yet, many of the structures, procedures, responsibilities, everything is still in flux and everything is still very experimental. And suddenly there's a lockdown, you have to move to online teaching. You cannot have the parents walking in and out of the school. So it has been really, really, really hard on the school, which we see especially insofar as the school has not grown in numbers as much as we wanted. We are now about 50 kids in the school, which is nice, right? It's a nice growth also, but we thought we would grow much larger. I think I'll stop here. Probably, Frank, you have collected some questions, and then we can also see where to go.
Okay, let me take a general one from the beginning, and then there are several others after that. One listener asks, what is the proportion of Jews in Berlin who are Orthodox, conservative, and Reform, and secular? Mm-hmm. Is this proportion the same in Germany in general? And how many people belong to your shul?
Okay, it's somewhat difficult to answer because people are not members at the individual shul, they are members at the overall Berlin Jewish community. For example, we'll have a bat mitzvah in 2 weeks, where the bar mitzvah of the older brother 3 years ago was in a different shul. So do I count this family? How much, going back and forth between shuls. Also, there are several synagogues in Berlin who are not directly affiliated with the movement. There is one shul which we cooperate a lot with. Actually, the president of Masoti Germany is from one of the founding families of that shul, post-war shul. They are small c conservative. So the service is mostly kind of traditional run through, but they have developed a beautiful young community of people living in the neighborhood. So they do amazing children's activities. They do shiurim. They are very open. So this younger crowd would love to become also the service to become egalitarian and to become officially affiliated with Masoti. They currently have a project of building a neighborhood center where the main building of the synagogue stood before the war. And they already said that if they will do that and will open a nursery school in there, they do want Masoti to run the nursery school. So do I count a shul where the entire leadership wants it to be Masoti, where many of the kids already come to our nursery school, and they're already talking of how will they set up, you know, a carpool to take the kids to the school. Are they already Masorti? Yes or no? Of the 10,000 members, even on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, maybe 2,000 are actually in one of the synagogues. So nobody knows how the other 8,000 would affiliate if we really would ask them. I mean, obviously they're not Orthodox, because then they would come to shul. So it's really difficult to say. I love to say, and I think this is really true, it's not only my perspective, that most people in Germany, if they knew what conservative Judaism really is, this is how they would identify. Because they feel orthodoxy is not what they want, and reform is not authentic enough and not committed enough. And, you know, I'm not bashing neither of the other movements, but in terms of numbers, Masorti in Germany is still very, very small. This is also due to the fact that we say we'd rather work in education with people from the different communities. Let me give you one example. 6 years ago, the president of Masorti Germany stepped down from being the president of Masorti Germany because she was elected vice president of the entire Berlin Jewish community. And then she said, okay, being president of this 10,000 members community, she cannot be president of Masorti also, because that's too much of party lines. She needs to have a more neutral aspect. So I could say, you know, 6 years ago, the Berlin Jewish community of 10,000 members was actually more or less Masorti, right? That's how far as numbers go.
Thank you. Should I go on?
Yeah, please.
Why were emigres from Russia in the 1980s particularly attracted to Germany as opposed to other countries in Eastern Europe? Was it perception of increased freedom, less anti-Semitism in Germany, or that Germany had confronted its Nazi ghosts?
Actually, I think that's an amazing question, and the answer is probably all of that. So people from the former Soviet Union really wanted to leave the former communist countries. So for the Jews, Poland and Czech Republic and Hungary were not an option, because then they also could have stayed in Leningrad and Kiev and you know. So and that means that Germany and Austria were the closest countries to get to. By East Germany being part of the Eastern Bloc, there were many connections, right? So they had an experience with East. So we were in this very interesting in-between situation of former East Germany, former communist Germany, now being part of a Western democracy, being developed, and you know the economic development in East Germany going really, really fast because West Germany obviously helped. People, I think language was a big issue. So German was more important than some other European languages. And the feeling that Germany really has dealt with its past, I think was a very strong feeling. And then probably the most important factor, Germany did open its doors, right? The welcoming Jewish immigrants was policy from the chancellor and president, etc. Everybody was in favor of doing that, and they were. I don't remember which year. One of the early 90s years was when the Jewish immigration to Germany was higher than the Jewish immigration to Israel. And the then president of Israel spoke to the chancellor of Germany and saying, you know, could you please be a little less welcoming so that more people come to Israel? And obviously he got the response, no, we as Germany, any Jew who wants to come into the country is welcome and will be well received, which is actually what we are seeing now, right? We're talking, when did we start talking about now the refugees from the Ukraine? Within less than 2 weeks, there is the clear statement by the German government: we want we want to enable the Jewish refugees to settle here if they want so.
Nice to hear. More questions.
Yes.
How many Israelis reside today in Germany, and are they involved with the Jewish communities? What's their impact or influence, if at all? And how would you describe the relationship between the Israeli communities and the various Jewish centers in Germany?
Mm-hmm. Also, great question. Again, I'm sorry about that. We do not have numbers, because many of the Israelis do not come to Germany on their Israeli passport, but before they come, they take out a passport, be it a German passport due to their grandparents, or even a Spanish or Polish or Romanian or whatever passport, which allows them immediately access to work and social benefits within the European Union. So there are only guesstimates. We think of about somewhere between 10 and 25,000 Israelis in Berlin, just in Berlin. And Berlin is the most important center, and a couple of thousands in the other larger cities. And as I said, we really do not have numbers for overall numbers. The Israeli embassy is trying to find out, but also they are not really able to, because there are different reasons why Israelis come. Some come because they want to get out of the political situation, both the matzav, like the political situation in terms of the feeling threatened and the insecurity, etc., and also probably now less not being happy with Israel, with the government's politics. And there are many business relationships also. You need also to bear in mind that you can work in Germany and fly back home for the weekend. It's a 4 hours flight from Germany, and there's 1 hour time difference. So this is, if people live in Berlin and work in Frankfurt and commute for the weekend, and if they do that by train, it takes longer than if you go to Israel by plane. And actually, the plane tickets are cheaper than the train tickets in that comparison. It's crazy, but that's the situation. Now, the Israelis mostly are not connected to the Jewish communities. There are in the larger cities, there are really independent Israeli communities. There are Facebook groups, there are Hebrew library initiatives, etc. We realize we both in the kindergarten and in the school, we have many Israeli families, because we have such a strong emphasis on Hebrew and do Hebrew on the mother tongue level also. But it's really complicated for them. They coming from Israel, religion for them is ultra-Orthodoxy, and teaching them slowly and carefully that religion can be fun and can correspond to your values of the 21st century is a complicated situation. We're doing a good job on that, but it's not so easy. Let me think. I think that gives kind of an overall picture. So for example, it's all something which COVID has prevented us from doing more, connecting the school families more to the synagogue, right? Like by saying, we will do joint Kabbalat Shabbat services, etc. Has not happened because of COVID, but that's one of the plans of gently introducing the Israelis to religious life and synagogue life. But it's complicated.
Okay, thank you. I have several that I'm merging for you in a minute. Just a second. Here it is. You're complimented here on all of the things that you do and all the things that you have done. This questioner thinks that's awesome. Good for him. I do too. What are interfaith relations like? And is there anti-Semitism? Several people have asked that question. Do you have guards at your services like we do?
So let me start with the interfaith piece, because that's much more fun to talk about. We have very close relationships, both with the Christian churches and with several Muslim organizations. My husband, who's also a rabbi, does an amazing project together with different Muslim educators or imams. They go as a tandem, a rabbi and an imam, into school classes. And sometimes they just, walk into the class and say, okay, now first question, who of us is the rabbi and who is the imam? And then from then they work on breaking down prejudices which are out there. And it's really a lot of, it's a joy to work with the Muslim community. Obviously there are issues also, and there is Islamism, etc. But we have very strong partners. One of the things which, since it's not yet, it's still in the planning phase, Rabbi Mero did not mention, we are going to build a 3-religion nursery school as of next year, which means we will have 45 spaces for Jewish kids, 45 for Muslim kids, and 45 for Christian kids. A beautiful new building under one roof. What we will do, because also especially because we said we need to run our part of the nursery school, of the kindergarten, in a bilingual German Hebrew, because it's in a neighborhood where many Israelis live. So that will be our target group. We will have separate, how can I say that? Each group will have their own floor. And then we will do joint activities. So we can, the kitchen will be vegetarian kosher for everybody. And we will build the year and the celebrations together with the Christian and the Muslim educators and families. And I'm really, really looking forward to this. I must say, with all the, whenever there is an anti-Semitic or a Islamophobic attack here in Europe or even beyond, working on that project with our partners who have all become very, very close friends has kept up my hopes and my energy, actually, that we can change the world one family by one family. And starting with the kids ages 18 months till they start school, and working with their families in just establishing long-lasting friendships and relationships, I think will be an amazing contribution. The question of anti-Semitism, we have guards in front of the synagogue and of the community centers. It's police, it's Israelis, it's very well protected. I'm sometimes wondering how much of that is real danger and how much of it is actually also that the German government says, like, oh, God forbid that something would happen at a synagogue. And you're aware of that. There was the attack on the synagogue in Halle on Yom Kippur 2 years ago. Actually, something that's not so well known is that by coincidence, a group of young people from Berlin was at that synagogue. So when we were during Yom Kippur services, the guards came upstairs and stood at the door of the shul and kind of were waving to me that I should come out because they have to tell me something. And then we consulted with, I went to my board members and we were thinking, okay, what do we do? Do we just continue or do we tell people, etc.? And then we decided we need to tell people because people will come back into the afternoon services after having taken a break. I made the announcement that something happened, and only while saying it, I realized that one of our congregants actually was in Halle at that time. So, I'm standing there and say there was a shooting at the synagogue. We do not yet know anything else, but we want to to let you know. And then he really went downstairs, and by, I don't know why, he remembered her phone number. I mean, it's Yom Kippur, right? So he didn't have his phone with him, but he remembered her phone number, and he did, from the downstairs phone, he did call her and did reach her. So we were very, very closely affected by that attack. Anti-Semitism, how can I say that? I think Germany has the lowest rate of anti-Semitism in all of Europe, which and especially public discourse is so clear that anti-Semitism is a no-go, and sometimes it's more complicated to tell to somebody, you know what you just said has, I'm then trying to say something like anti-Semitic undertones, can be understood as anti-Semitic, and people very often are so deeply offended by that it's really complicated to then, explain what's the meaning. It very often ties into with anti-Zionist, anti-Israel feelings, and the mixture between the German right extreme on the one hand, and then anti-Semitic statements coming from a Muslim or Near Eastern perspective that makes life complicated. But we don't, for example, BDS as a movement was banned by the German parliament and declared to be anti-Semitic. So, for example, the situation you have on the US campuses is not at all the situation here. There might be discussions, there might be demonstrations. There are now statements like, yeah, now everybody is taking care of the Ukraine. What about Palestine? It happens, but it's not dominating the discourse.
A couple of rather specific questions here. One of them is, are you aware of Israelis investing in real estate in Germany? And can you gauge about what that volume is like?
That's very, it's happening a lot, let's say. It's also, the Jewish community in general in Germany is pretty heavy in real estate, which is also due to all the restitution that was done after the war. So the people taking over, taking care of buildings which other people who have fled then handed over to some Jewish persons dealing with it. And there are many Israelis doing real estate. I don't think that there are any numbers out there, because nobody would look at that closely and see. Some people say, on the other hand, some people say jokingly that most of Tel Aviv's skyline actually is owned by Frankfurt Jews. That's another piece into that.
Oh, here's another one. Not really in the same category, but we have a listener who says the old age home on Grosse Hamburger Straße, not too far away from your shul, was a deportation site during the Holocaust. Is there any recognition there to remind people today of what happened there during the war?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. There is a. If I had, when we were preparing for this talk, I still had the idea of pulling up pictures and really showing a little bit more, and then I just said, I'll just talk. There is a monument there. There is the home for the elderly was, the old age home was in the front, and behind it, you had to walk kind of through the building, was the oldest Jewish cemetery. And that's preserved as a space also with a monument. Next to that space is the Jewish high school, which is also, also has a plaque and has a monument. On that street, it's one of the most intense streets, I would say. There is another amazing monument. It's called the Missing House, because it's a space of a house that was destroyed by bombs during the war, and somebody, the artist, reconstructed, from a phone book or something, who was living in which apartment. And on the two walls of the neighboring buildings, the names of people living there are written. And it says also when it was known where, how, their dates when they were born and when they were killed, and when they died, and and several of them were Jewish. And then it also says in which, if they survived, or in which concentration camp they were killed. So Berlin, the city of Berlin, is actually a walking museum, if you want to say so. And I think, if Princeton wants to organize a tour to Berlin, we would obviously be absolutely happy to have you over for Shabbat, and so you can come and see all these things in reality. Yeah.
Thank you. Also, another one that has multiple questions together. In what manner or what approach do you use to teach about the Holocaust to young German Jews? Kids, young adults, etc.
When my kids went to school, and Yom HaShoah was coming up, and they were in first grade, I was like, do I really want my kids to realize that part of history? And the school had a ceremony. They did, since we are more or less on the same time as Israel, you can use the tzfira, like the 1 minute, the 2 minute siren that's going on in Israel. And that's kind of a core of Yom HaShoah events here in Germany within the Jewish community, of, you turn on the radio over the internet or something, and you really listen in lifetime to the Israeli siren and stand still during that time. Then when I picked my kids up later from the bus, I realized that for them, talking about the Shoah, or talking about Haman on Purim, was both very, very far away in history, right? What the schools do here very often is, there are still enough people who can tell how they were children during the war and during the Shoah. Walking the streets of Berlin, you have monuments all over the place. So kids kind of really grow up with, like in front of the building, you have these stumbling stones. I don't know if you're aware of that. There are these small golden plaques with names of like the size, like I'm showing now, with the names of people. And that's a conversation you have when you walk with your kids through town, right? In front of the JCC, it's a new building built in the 60s, and then the entrance is built from the ruins of the huge synagogue that was there. If you enter our shul, you realize immediately that something has gone wrong here, because what's standing today is kind of the entrance part, and the main sanctuary, which seated 3,000 people, is just gone. So kids have this very direct feeling of something is missing here, right? Something is missing. The synagogues are too big. The police in front of the building. So and then what within the Jewish context, it's an interesting struggle. I remember when the high school started, and they had obviously also non-Jewish teachers, the parents complained that teaching Holocaust, the non-Jewish history teachers obviously was not, in the first year, not conscious enough. And the general German curriculum, for example, tries to
turn my watch back because I missed the first hour. I was on the old time.
Hello.
To
Mine didn't.
How can I say that?
Sorry, I'm trying to find all of those.
That's fine. So I lost my thought in the moment. So for the non-Jew, if you look at German history books for the high school, and the Holocaust really takes a very important point. So one of the big questions is, how could that happen, and why did people let that happen? And then there are texts which kind of invite the kids to see themselves, what would you have done if you would have been alive then? Obviously from a German non-Jewish perspective, right? So the history teacher at the Jewish high school in the first year kind of did his thing, which he had done as a teacher in the school for the last 15 years, and did not really realize that with the Jewish kids, the story is totally different, right? And then they brought in the parents to talk and change the curriculum, but that has been quite an interesting experience, actually.
Here's an interesting one. We're down to the end here. This listener says she lived in Berlin in 1993 and 94 while the Neue Synagogue was being renovated, but she left the country before it was possible to attend services. She said she was aware from living in Prague that German teens needed to visit Holocaust sites in order to graduate and often came to the Jewish quarter there. Is this still a requirement? And if so, do they interact with German Jews as part of it?
Actually, I'm not aware that it's really a formal requirement. So the Holocaust is a topic, as I already said, in history lessons, in German lessons. It's really dealt with. And many teachers are taking a very active approach and go to places. So there are many groups of students coming to the synagogue. We have all the time requests of groups of non-Jews who want to come to our services. The Jewish Museum here in Berlin is doing an amazing job with that. But here's the real problem, right? If you do the math and you look at the number of synagogues in Germany, and you look at the number of people, non-Jews in Germany, who are interested in coming and seeing and experiencing, we just cannot do that. It's just too much. We could have, if we would accept everybody who wants to come, we would have more non-Jews at every single service than Jews, which obviously then you can't build a congregation, right? And then you don't have a living congregation. So we have actually, with, how can I say that? I really, with big regrets, we have been channeling people and school classes who want to be in touch into the museum, because it's just not possible. There is one Jewish high school in Berlin, right? Every other high school in Berlin would love to meet the kids. Just no way in terms of numbers. It's just not possible. So we are working. I'm trying to focus on working with teachers and other people who then can keep telling it, but it's a complicated situation because we cannot do what the German public would like us to do. I sometimes jokingly say I could spend my entire rabbinic work on talking to non-Jews, explaining about Judaism, etc. And which is great, right? So whenever I write an email saying we have this standard formula already, whenever I write an email saying actually you can't come to services, I'm kind of, it's so great that you are so interested, but unfortunately.
Thank you for that. I have one last question. I've been saving it for the end because the chat box is filled with kudos for you. People have enjoyed this talk quite a bit. But this question I was interested in myself. What drove you to become a rabbi? Would you tell us about your own Jewish journey?
Okay, now that's depends. So this is the question is when do I start? I could start if I start kind of just a couple of years before becoming a rabbi. Then it's pretty easy because we started at synagogue and I started to teach bar mitzvah kids, and I realized that I really love doing it, and that I contribute something which people have been looking for and have been missing, and kindling the flame in Jewish kids and say, you know, this is relevant. Let me give you an example. We just had a bar mitzvah this Shabbat, and difficult parsha, even more difficult Haftorah with you know, all the killing of Amalek, etc. And the father, then non-Jewish father of the bar mitzvah kid, was really opposed because he's really much into pacifism, etc. So the kid gives this amazing speech about studying the text and dealing with the critical approach to the text. And I felt so blessed of this kid really having taken the Torah in his own hands and made it his own by working through the issues, right? So this is for me, this is such a blessing. Or something else is just 2 weeks ago, we had a Beit Din, and I had mostly people there who were Jewish, either from their father or on the mother's side, but say the grandmother got baptized in order to survive the Holocaust. And since then, Judaism has not been active in the family. And now this 25-year-old has rediscovered her Judaism, and I could take her to the mikveh. These are, I mean, there's such a deep blessing and such a satisfaction in that. And I started doing these kind of things. I mean, not the conversion class, obviously, but the teaching. And I did teach a group of Russian immigrants, and we worked 2 months on the Pesach Haggadah, and then we had a Pesach Seder where literally all the 60 people around the room did read at least a couple of lines from the Haggadah, and they came with nothing before that, right? So this is kind of my the energy that drives me, right? Now, if I go a little further back in my personal history, then there are these many years of saying, no, I'm not going to become a rabbi. And one day, somebody will have to write the history of all those rabbis who started out becoming rabbis by saying for years, no, I'm not going to become a rabbi, because everybody around them already knew that that's what's going to happen. And here's the very personal piece in that. Since I did not grow up Jewish myself, finding my way into Judaism was many years of saying, nah, you can't do that. I mean, you know, from a German family and everything, that's not, find a different answer to my own spiritual search, etc. And then it was when I made up my mind and said, okay, no way, I need to become Jewish because this is whom I'm meant to be. Then people started saying, yeah, you're going to become a rabbi. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to become a rabbi. I'm going to go into international NGO peace work or whatever. And then all these educational things happened, kind of, you know, were thrown at me. And then I had to decide, am I going to drop all of that, where I feel I'm contributing something life-changing and transformative for individuals and their families, or will I say, okay, this it looks absurd, it sounds absurd, but if this is what it's meant to be, then let's go for it. And that's how it was.
Thank you so much. That was very, very good. We wish you a happy Purim.
Thank you.
Let me turn the floor back over to you, Moshe.
You know, Gisa, I had this script already written out early this morning, and I just have to change it. It was great. It was really great, and I know everybody who's on the Zoom knows that, and I want to let you know that I was distracted for 2 minutes during your presentation early on, and I already emailed Andy about having a trip to Germany and also to Poland, where our previous speaker was. So we'll work on that, and we're going to hopefully come to visit you. So we can't thank you enough. I also want to thank Frank Lees, who you worked with me before last week or something. You know, he runs these programs on the day of. And that's complicated enough. And we saw that today because we couldn't find you, okay? But he also meets with our speakers ahead of time to iron out any technical issues and to answer their questions. And most of us just see what happens the day of. And I just want to thank him because I know what he does before. I want to remind you, the people in the audience, about our upcoming programs, and I can go back to the script now. The Adult Education Committee is really proud to welcome world-renowned Bible translator and scholar, Professor Robert Alter of UC Berkeley. His talk, The Challenges of Translating the Bible, will be on Wednesday, March 30th at 7:30. Dr. Deborah Miller, formerly a faculty member of JTS, will speak on the images of Hagar. The program is an example of the committee's efforts to broaden our offerings. The program will be on Tuesday, April 15th at 8 p.m. And finally, the final program of the Goes Global series for this semester will originate from Jerusalem. The former #2 person at the Jewish Agency for Israel, Dr. David Breakstone, will share his insights on the seldom discussed Jewish community of Uganda. The program will take place on Sunday, May 15th at 1:30. I want to thank you again, Gisa, thank Frank, and thank our audience for joining us today. Thanks so much. And happy Purim, Judy says to remind you. Okay, bye-bye. Frank, it's all yours.
Okay, usually we shut down slowly here. I don't think there are any other questions. So we'll close. I'll close this session in 2 minutes. Thank you all for asking great questions, good audience. And Rabbi Ederberg, we really enjoyed this a lot. Have relatives who come from Berlin and from nearby countries. And it's very interesting to hear you speak about them today.
Thank you so much. It was my pleasure to be with you all. All the best. Bye.
Bye-bye.